we are here ready to stream. We got Thomas, our aquatics expert, our video host, here to answer your questions as per usual. How you doing today, man?
Doing pretty good.
Yeah,
it's been a good day. My chickens have been laying all kinds of eggs for me recently, and it's been making me very happy.
Every time I go to your place, I find that the number of chickens, hens, roosters is like they're multiplying at an exponential rate.
There's something I learned about after I started getting chickens, which I wasn't aware of at the time, and that's called chicken math. And it's basically a meme, because chicken people who start getting chickens have this weird habit of becoming obsessive and getting more chickens.
Yeah.
And then more chickens. And then more and I am no exception to that at all. So, yeah. So I got another 12 chickens between
it's ridiculous.
The last time I saw you and yesterday.
And not just that, but our shoot yesterday, we were shooting a video, and we had to kind of stop partway through and wait for the roosters to stop crowing directly outside of the window.
Yeah, they come right up to the house, the front door, everything, because they know we go in there and they know we feed them, so they kind of follow us. But yeah, they were sitting right in front of the window, mid-shoot, crowing away, and I had to stop and be like, all right. Brian actually went to the window and tried to chase them away.
Yeah,
by being scary. It didn't work very
I'd open
well.
the window and make ridiculous sounds, and it worked.
A little bit, yeah. They like casually walked away. They didn't get scared. They're just like, ah.
All right. Well, with that said, chicken talk is great, but let's move into some questions.
Aquatics, possibly.
Yeah. Let's see here. So I've got a bunch of questions here. One question, I've got a tank. What kind of fish do you recommend? I think we're gonna kind of glide over those. Josh is we have Josh, by the way, in our chat section moderating, answering questions. So for questions like that we've gone over just a ton of times, we're gonna have Josh kind of take care of those, and we'll move on to maybe more specific questions in terms of people's problems they may be having or whatever.
Yeah, sure.
Let's see. Okay, I see a lot of hellos. Yes. Can I crush some rocks from the sea and add them to my aquarium?
Are we talking saltwater to saltwater, saltwater to freshwater? I would say, and my answer for this kind of stuff is always similar, but you got to be careful anytime you take something from nature and put it in your aquarium, because anything that you bring in, whether it's bacterially, it could be some kind of fungus, or it could be parasitic. You could be bringing something into your aquarium that your captive raised fish won't be able to deal with their immune system. Like, they've never encountered it and they're never going to. So you got to be careful that way, even algae. But other than that, I mean, you can take rocks, as long as they're not super porous, bake them or boil them and clean them up, no soap obviously, and you can try to incorporate those in your tank. It's really important though that you know what kind of rock it is, because if it is something that is made from limestone or is heavy in calcium or alkalinity, let's say, you could be also raising the pH of your water inadvertently, which is why I don't usually recommend seashells and stuff to go into freshwater tanks, because you don't want to buffer the water if your fish don't want a higher pH. So there's things you have to take into account. Is it doable? Technically, there is risk. I always recommend just getting clean rock from an aquarium store or pet store so that you don't have to worry about that kind of stuff.
Play it safe.
Usually, yeah.
All right, this one's a pretty broad question. There's no one answer, but maybe you can go over like a quick
Sure.
top 3 things. What can I do? My fish always die after I buy it.
Oh, that's so sad.
It is very sad.
It could be lots of things. If this is your first aquarium, you could be making like the most rookie mistakes there are, and it's mistakes people make all the time. And we've actually got a video called the top 10 aquarium do nots. I'm gonna get Brian to throw that in the chat section there for you so that you can see it. But there's lots of things. So how you introduce fish to the tank can dictate whether or not they survive, whether or not the aquarium is ready for fish, like it's been cycled already, or whether or not you're using tap water without using a water conditioner. If you, for instance, sometimes people will leave their water out to try to get rid of chlorine. That won't neutralize heavy metals or anything like that, but it will degas chlorine. It won't degas chloramines because it's much more stable. So sometimes trying that method and then using the water, you could be harming the fish that way because the chloramine's still there. Another alternative is the source where you're getting your fish. Potentially that could be the problem. I will say though, when you walk into a store and you look at the health of all the fish that are there, you can get generally a pretty good idea of whether or not those fish are going to be unhealthy and whether or not you should avoid bringing them home. But that said, if you're new to the aquarium hobby and you can't really tell whether or not a fish is happy and healthy, my suggestion is whenever you go to a store and you want to buy a fish and you're looking at the aquarium, you want to look for fish that are not sticking around the surface only and gasping at the surface. You don't want fish that seem overly lethargic unless it's a species that just doesn't move around a lot. And always ask to see the fish eat, because if a fish is eating, it is generally happy and healthy. Usually when fish get sick, they stop eating. That's a massive problem. So, and obviously you want to make sure there's nothing on the outside of the fish that shouldn't be there, like fuzz or dots or ripped fins, stuff like that. But I bet that it's probably a combination of things, and maybe just have a look at we have a video on how to set up a freshwater aquarium. That might help you along as well, just to make sure you've done all the steps that you need. We've also got a video on how to add fish to a freshwater aquarium. That might help. It could be something as simple as temperature shock. You're taking them out of the bag, putting them in your tank. The water temperatures are vastly different. That can cause death. That was a really long answer,
but a good one.
Yes.
It is all valid.
Yeah, and if you want, contact our support team. Let them know exactly what you're doing, and they can help walk you through any possible problems there are in your process, right? Ultimately, I'd really love to hear you come back and say, hey, I figured out what the problem was, and now my fish are doing awesome. Like, I hate seeing people leave the hobby, and I don't want you to get discouraged by the fact that you're losing fish. So, yeah, we'll help you out.
Definitely. And it's worth mentioning, I did throw the top 10 aquarium do nots into the chat.
Sweet, thank you.
So check that out. Solid video. One of our most popular, 539,000 views so far, which is amazing.
Can't believe that many people care about what I said.
It's crazy. It's awesome.
It's always very... It's cool.
Yeah, very.
I never expected it, but it's really
it's
cool.
a really solid video. We've had nothing but good. Check it out if you haven't already. If you're new to the hobby, the top 10 do nots, very, very valuable thing, I think, to check out and start off with, just to kind of set yourself up for success rather than failure.
Yeah. Basically, the video, just to give you a quick rundown, they're the most common things that people do wrong, based on what I've heard people tell me over my course of working in stores, like 10 or 12 years of working in store and interacting with customers directly. It's the things they did incorrectly. So I just wanted people to know what they were and try to mitigate some of that.
Yeah. Next up, what would you say are the most popular styles and themes for fish tanks currently? Kind of weird, but it's for a school project.
I honestly think there is a massive trend towards keeping high-end corals and reef aquariums. That's been just steadily climbing since I basically got into the hobby. There's been an explosion of technology that's come out to make that a lot easier for us. Companies are constantly innovating in the saltwater and reef aquarium market, coming up with a lot of new technology, which is always a healthy sign. And there's incredibly ridiculously rainbow colored corals that are being collected and propagated in captivity and grown as frags. Like, that industry has just blown up so much bigger than it ever was in the past, and it's just going and going and going. So that is a big trend. I think the second really big trend is really neatly put together planted aquariums. Planted aquariums have, again, exploded. It took longer than reef keeping in North America anyways. But the planted aquarium is really having a strong, steady, progressive growth, and people are starting to find it more and more fascinating. So I think there's a huge surge in that, and that's going to just keep going and going and going. Nature aquariums are just crazy awesome.
And it's one of your favorite things, if I recall. You love doing these things that are like real to nature, like very close to the real life scenario, the real life.
I do. Biotopes I'm a big fan of. I mean, I would say the planet aquarium hobby where it's going right now, it couldn't be further from biotopes. Like, it is miniature landscapes, overly groomed aquariums that look immaculate, and they replicate a scene. People are basically using the aquarium as a canvas to create a landscape or a painting. Whereas biotopes, the focus isn't so much on how the aquarium looks, so much as how the aquarium actually functions for the animals that are inside of it. It's to strictly replicate something. So whether or not you can see the fish becomes irrelevant.
Yeah.
You are just trying to make them happy so that they either breed or, whatever. But yeah, that's my answer. Those two things, a lot.
Hello, I'm looking to set up a sump for my freshwater 150 gallon.
Nice.
It's a new tank, and I'm debating sump versus canisters. Never did a sump before. Help!
If the tank's already drilled with overflows, like half your work is really done, then it's just picking a sump and hooking it up with plumbing. Like, it's super simple. I don't know if you followed our freshwater mega build, the 265 that I did. That was a freshwater with a sump. Super simple setup. The sump that I picked for that system actually worked really well. I recommend it. It's a great sump. It's for the value, like for how much it costs, it's phenomenal. It's not a very expensive sump. They get really pricey if you get into some crazy stuff. But yeah, like the nice thing about a sump is you're adding water volume, which is never a bad thing, and you have just a crazy amount of space for media. So whatever biomedia you're going to throw in there, you can just stack it sky high essentially and have a lot more than you actually need for that volume of aquarium, which means you can stock quite heavily, and it makes life very, very easy. So yes, I think sump is a great idea. Watch that mega build series on filtration, because I also talk about using a canister tandem with a sump and why I did it, which is I like redundancy. I like knowing I've got a backup all the time. So have a look, because I think you might actually enjoy that. It might help, give you the ideas that you need to figure out what you want to do with your system.
Yeah, and I will link that in the chat as per usual. Next up, how do you know the gallons per hour for how many gallons you have?
How do you know what GPH you're aiming for? Well, the thing is, turnover in aquarium will depend very much on what you're going to keep in that aquarium. So like the turnover in a reef aquarium in just gallons per hour can be more than 20 times the volume of the tank when you account for all circulation that's happening in there. So, if you've got a 5-gallon freshwater tank, you might have 100 gallons per hour. You might have 80 gallons per hour. It depends on the filter at that point. Like you could get a hang-on that's rated for 5 gallons. That might be 100 gallons per hour. You could get, a canister for a 5-gallon tank, and it might only be 60 gallons per hour. So my general rule of thumb is I like to shoot, depending on species, between 5 to 10 times turnover freshwater and 10 to 20 times turnover for saltwater. That's just me. But you'll find when you're looking at the actual GPH rating of filters, for instance, Eheim filters will have a lower GPH rating for the size tank that it's rated for than a Rena Philstar will. And that's just manufacturer to manufacturer. Eheim tailors the flow rating directly to what the biomedia is going to require in that specific setup. Rena's shooting for, and some of the Eheim canister filters have zero bypass, which also affects that. And, Rena shoots for a higher turnover to try to get more water through the media, period, which can help when you're using mechanical media or carbon, but may not benefit the biomedia. And Renas have more bypass than an Eheim does. So there's all kinds of things that change. It gets complicated. But like I said, 5 to 10 for fresh is what I usually aim for, and then 10 to 20 for saltwater, depending on what I'm keeping.
Hey Thomas, I have a question. I have 3 fancy goldfish with an internal parasite, have been treating with Metroplex for about 10 days. When can I expect them to be cured? Love your videos, by the way.
Ooh. I generally, if I'm quarantining, if you're not quarantining, you're just treating the whole tank. Assume that they've probably still got them for up to 4 weeks. If I'm quarantining, it's usually going to be 4 weeks or better. So 4 weeks to 8 weeks, depending, before I add them back to the main tank. You want to be darn sure that they're not there anymore before you introduce them to other fish, because otherwise you could just be expanding an issue and, creating a new cycle of parasites that you're going to have to continue to fight off, which sucks. So yeah, I would say at least 4 weeks, and then I would feel pretty confident in either adding more fish if I have to, or putting them back in with their buddies.
Next up, what do I do to cycle an uncycled tank with fish in it?
Okay, so one of the things you could do if you already have fish in a tank and it hasn't been cycled, so you're cycling the tank with fish. Lots of people do that. It's not necessarily the best way to do it. I personally don't actually think it's the worst way as long as you approach it in the right way. So number one, you want to add bacteria to the tank. So whether you're adding a dormant bacteria in the form of, a bacterial additive like cycle or stability from CChem or Big Al's biosupport, you want to add bacteria. You could also add live bacteria in the form of something like ATM colony, which should give you all the live nitrifying bacteria you're going to require for that cycle. It supposedly instant cycles the tank. I still think you need to have some caution and not overstock and feed appropriately until that bacteria is actually settled on surfaces and processing waste. And then you just want to feed very slowly and stock fish very slowly. So if you have your tank, you've got let's say you got 3 fish, little fish in a 20-gallon aquarium, you would give them 2 weeks of just low feeding. So not like piling the food in there, just whatever they can eat in about a minute, and do that, every day to every other day. And, make sure you test your water just to make sure you don't have ammonia creeping up past safe levels, because you don't want to kill your fish with ammonia. If you have to, you can do an emergency water change, but give them 2 weeks before you add any other fish. And you want to make sure on your test kit, you're starting to register nitrates. As soon as you start registering nitrates, your ammonia will drop to 0, or really, it should in a very quick period of time, or it'll already be at 0 and you're going to see nitrates. That's when it's time to then start adding a few more fish. And then give it a couple of weeks, add a few more fish. Couple of weeks, few more fish. That way you're bringing your bio load up slowly and allowing the bacteria colony to continuously grow to compensate for that, so you don't end up with an ammonia spike that's going to be detrimental to your fish.
Moving on. I have a fluval 5-gallon tank all-in-one. What is a good wave maker or a small super small? What's a good wave maker, a good small wave maker, I guess, is the essential question here.
I think my absolute favorite, and I think Josh may have used this in one of his builds, but my absolute favorite one that I've used so far for a tiny wave maker is the Akamai KPS wave maker pump. It's Wi-Fi controllable, operates much like some of the more expensive heavy hitter wave makers out there that you just can't get small enough to fit comfortably in a 5. And you can turn them way down and still program them to do all kinds of fun stuff. They have a ton of presets for various size tanks and for various types of corals or plants or fish or whatever you're keeping. So it's a super user-friendly product. It's a tiny pump. They're quiet as all heck. Like, I can never hear them. I can hear my sump running, and that's pretty darn quiet. I can't ever hear those. I think I'd probably hear the lights first. But yeah, that's got to be my favorite. I'm trying to think if there's anything else quite small enough. I mean, Coralia Nanos are going to be less expensive. They have 0 controllability. It's just going to be a plug it in, and it's either on a timer that's turning it on and off, or it's just on. They do a really good job too if you don't want to spend more money on something that is controllable. However, I would definitely vouch for the KPS being a massive value for what you're paying for it. It is insane what you get for the money. I was super impressed when I first used it, and I am still super impressed because I have yet to come across anything else that performs like that for the price.
Nice. I've linked it in our chat here, so if you guys want to check that link out just to learn more, read up about it, you can do that. We'll move on to the next question. Hey guys, I have a livebearer tank and the fish are healthy except for one guppy female. When I bought her, I thought she was pregnant, but she passed away. Could it have been a parasite?
Okay, here's the thing. It could have been a parasite. She could also have been pregnant. Like all animals, unfortunately, and humans even, sometimes pregnancies don't end in the best way. There can be complications with a pregnancy, or the fish could have been very young to be getting pregnant, and potentially that's what did her in. It wouldn't have been the first time I've ever seen that. I've literally seen female live bearers die in the middle of producing those offspring or giving birth. So yes, it could also have been a parasite. It could have been, if her scales were all raised, it could have been something like dropsy, which is incredibly difficult to treat. If all the other fish are happy and healthy, there's a good chance that it was probably something to do with getting pregnant young, or just having a complication with that pregnancy. Keep in mind that a lot of guppies and live bears are produced en masse, which means the genetics get weaker and weaker the more you produce fish, and down the line, like especially if it's line breeding. And breeders will do everything in their power to vary the genetics in their livestock, so to make sure they're breeding unrelated fish and bringing in new bloodlines from other breeders to try to mitigate that as best as possible. But the reality is sometimes fish just don't thrive because of line breeding. So it is possibly also something like that, something that just would have been out of your control regardless. But it's really difficult to say. If you want, I'm sure you may or may not have a photo of the fish, but if you wanted to, you could send it to our support team, give us a little bit more information, and they could probably drill it down to something more specific for you. Whereas I can't see the fish, I'm just going off of some basic information you provided, so it may not be, I simply can't be as accurate.
Yeah.
But support team can definitely drill it down to something a lot more specific for you.
Cool. And I've included the support team's email address in the chat. So again, anything like that that needs more detail or more context, send them a quick email with pictures, yada yada, like you said, and they should be able to get back to you and give you a much more in-depth answer. I will take this opportunity to say, don't send the support team photos of your aquarium for our React series. If possible, send those directly to me. Just so you know, our support team has been forwarding them to me, which is great, but I'm also going to link my email address. For our React series, we've gotten a ton, like hundreds.
Really?
Hundreds
Yeah.
of photos in.
Have we been getting saltwater?
Yes.
People keep saying they want to see me look at some saltwater stuff.
It's been mostly planted, but there has been, it's a huge variety.
This is what I'm saying. Like, planet tanks have really taken off.
Yes. So it's mostly that, but it's a huge variety that we've been getting people's videos and photos sent in. So
I'm
for
really
our
excited.
React series, if you haven't seen it yet, I'll link it for you. It's a really cool series where Thomas checks out your photos, your videos, and kind of gives you some feedback on your tank, some pointers, some compliments. It's a really cool series, and if you want to send in your photos and videos to be in this series, definitely do it. I'll link my address so you can do that. But for support, really just email those guys if you need help with something. They'd be happy to do it. With all that said, we'll move on.
Yay!
Can I add panda Corys to my 5.5 gallon with a female Betta?
I would say you'd probably be safe. They're bottom feeders that will stay on the bottom, and they stay relatively small, so you could just make sure you get a small group of them. I would say probably 3 or 4 tops if you've already got a beta in there. And she should leave them alone. They're gonna stay out of the way. Betas are kind of mid to top water fish. They're usually not on the bottom, and they usually don't care about anything that's on the bottom. That being said, they are a very aggressive fish. Females a little bit less so than the males, especially with each other. And there's always a chance it might not go awesome, but I would say that luck is on your side, given that they are bottom feeders and they will stay out of her way. She should not care. Awesome.
What do you think about using blaster sand in your aquarium?
Blaster sand? Never done it. I couldn't even, I've never actually used blaster sand for anything, not even for sandblasting. So I don't really know what it's made out of. I couldn't really tell you. Some people like using play sand in their aquariums. I find that stuff insanely dirty. So I don't like using it. It's also very fine and kicks up quite easy. In general, I don't usually recommend people use sand in their aquariums because it is a maintenance nightmare, or at least can be. So I don't really have an opinion on blaster sand. Haven't used it. But if it's anything like pool sand or play sand, pool sand is probably not as bad, but play sand is filthy. Oh my God. It's just dusty stuff. It takes a lot of rinsing, and then it can be a massive pain to ever gravel wash. Although I will say stuff usually sits on top of sand. So you could vacuum just the top of the sand. You're probably going to suck a little bit of sand out, but c'est la vie. That is the nightmare of having sand.
Next up, angelfish tank mates.
If you're raising young angelfish, you could do small schooling tetras or other small schooling fish along with them. Just keep in mind that angels as adults will act like predators do especially like cichlids do, and they will try to eat everything around them, even if it doesn't actually fit in their mouth. I've had that happen before with adult angels and black neon tetras. That was a frustrating period of time for me. So I would try to aim for slightly larger fish and definitely fish that are fast and will stay out of their way. Angels can be quick, but they're usually not super fast. So the faster the fish is with them, the more likely they are to get away. Zebra Daniels are great for that. White clouds are pretty quick. And then I think fish like Congo tetras can be really great tank mates. There's all kinds of stuff. There's lots and lots of stuff.
Cool. What does it mean when my Betta is just sitting in one spot but still alive?
Do you have a filter on your tank? If you do, is it working very slowly? Is there low turnover? There are lots of products out there like Betta hammocks, for instance, or Betta leafs that are designed specifically because bettas do this. They will, when they're feeling a little relaxed or spent for the day, they will just curl up and sit on something. It's very, very normal, especially if it's closer to the surface of the water. They love to do it. Males will do it. Sometimes they'll build a bubble nest and just chill on something that's nearby. But if you don't have a filter or a heater, that could be the reason. If it gets a little cool for them, or if there's low water flow, therefore low oxygen, they will often just kind of really lower their metabolism and sit there in order to conserve the water, and having a lower temperature will also lower the metabolism, which can put them in that kind of state as well. If they're coming up to eat, that's a pretty good sign. If they don't come up to eat, there's something going on, you want to fix it. So if you want to give us a little bit more detail about your setup, we could probably go into it further with you. Just let the support team know and they will do it, or drop it in the chat. And if we get to it, awesome.
Sweet. And Josh is there in the chat too, so if you can get to it, he'll help you out too.
Yeah.
Next up, Thomas, I have African cichlids that have long stringy poop on occasion. It's brown and they look otherwise healthy. It's not all of them. Is it a problem?
I think most fish poop in general looks long and stringy. If it is in a solid kind of chain together and it's just brown poop and it otherwise looks like their normal poop, but it just happens to be a long chain of it, I wouldn't think much of it. That can just happen. It's just super long turd. If it is pale at all, showing white, it's one fish all the time having this problem, that might be more indicative of internal parasites or something going on. You should send a picture of your fish's poop to our support team.
Yes, please. No context. Don't even ask them.
Just send a picture of fish poop. No, honestly though, if you send us a picture of it, we can help determine whether or not it's something that looks normal or something that looks odd that you should be paying attention to. But everybody likes a good turd question.
Yeah. Will clown knife fish eat live plants?
Clown knives? I have never seen a clown knife eat anything that's not another fish. They are predators. And they're really interesting ones because they act all normal during the day. They're just like, oh, look at us. We're just clown knives. And they bump into the walls and they act all dopey and they hide a little bit here and there and they swim around like no big deal. And then at night, they just start kicking the garbage at everything. They turn into monsters. They start eating things and they're really cool. I know I'm going on a tangent, but you could put a feeder fish in with a clown knife and they usually only eat live. I've never had one personally yet that I've been able to get to eat something else. Mind you, it's been probably the better part of 10 years since I've kept clown knives. And you can put something in with them and they'll slowly move up to it. They just slowly move up and then boom, it just disappears. They just like hit it like a ton of bricks. They're like snipers, except for sometimes they miss, which makes them crappy snipers. But yeah, clown knives are awesome. I really don't think they're eating plants. I don't even think they pull plants up. I think something else is going on.
That's good news, though. It's not the fish. Are you doing a reef tank? No comment.
That is almost a comment.
No, we will neither confirm nor deny.
No, I will not confirm.
We're like the CIA of fish. We will not confirm nor deny
whether or not a reef tank will be appearing.
Yeah.
I will say, you guys have been asking for something for a long time that may be appearing. I will not say what.
Could be so many things.
Yeah. Could be anything. Could be, I don't know, tacos. Oh, I want tacos. Anyways, keep going. Next question.
Okay. I have a Kessel A80. All my on my 5-gallon and a 20-gallon all-in-one system in my 5-gallon, can I put in an anemone for my small clownfishes?
I don't want to say yes. And I'll tell you why. 5 gallons is not a ton of water volume, and I find most anemones, at least clownfish hosting anemones, will get way too big for a 5. I mean, you could probably get a recently split bubble tip clone, which might be very small. Sometimes they're about the size of a toonie. If that's basically a $1, $2, $1 piece, 50-cent piece.
Sure,
That's it.
There we go. Yeah.
50-cent piece. And that could, potentially do okay for a while, but I find anemones just don't do well unless you have a larger tank. I think the smallest I'd really recommend is about 20 gallons. That should be enough space. I will say, though, that clownfish will host all kinds of stuff, not just anemones. Leather corals, long tentacle leather corals, love them. Euphyllias like hammer corals and frog spawns and torch corals. Clownfish have been known to host those. Hairy mushrooms even, which would definitely be fine in a 5-gallon. Clownfish will also host those. So I would look at those alternatives instead of going for an actual anemone until you have a larger system. Lighting shouldn't be a problem. It's mostly the size of the creature, like how big it's going to get, that's going to be an issue. So the biomass versus the actual size of the tank will become a problem for sure at some point. I would wager. Definitely.
Okay. I have a tank with 4 Corys and 4 rasboras, but I've noticed this white fluffy fungus looking stuff.
Yuck.
But now it's on my Corys fin, but it doesn't look like it's able to be pulled off. Any idea?
It's probably fin rot or fungus. Probably. I'm not even sure what I would recommend to treat that with. Our support team would definitely be able to help you out. I will be perfectly honest with you. I am not a medication expert. I've been fortunate enough to avoid having to use medications on many occasions. So it's not something I have on the tip of my tongue very often. Some things I have had a lot of experience with, so I can talk about it, like Furan 2 and using that to dip corals, because I've had to do it a bunch of times. But medicating fish, I haven't had the displeasure of having to do very often at all. So that makes me very fortunate, but at the same time, it means I have to go back to a resource index anytime I need to medicate a fish. So our support team, they will definitely be able to give you some more information and much more accurate information than I'm going to be able to give you right now, unfortunately.
Fair enough. Do money warts need any extra care than just pooping them in? I think you meant popping them in, but it's funner to say pooping. Do they need any extra care?
They will not thrive if you eat them and poop them into your tank.
Don't do it.
They won't. Honestly, I find money warts are not super difficult. You can try just dropping cuttings in. I mean, even Ludwigia, you can just float in the tank, even though it's a stem plant, and it will often just do fine, floating around ridiculously. So give it a shot. Small piece of it. Money wart's also not very expensive. So you should be okay.
Great. I'm considering replacing my current tank and moving everything into the new one. How can I transition everything with minimal mess? I have a small room. Love your videos.
Okay. So there's a couple of methods. Hopefully your tanks aren't massive. One method is get as many buckets as you can. Drain your tank, your smaller tank that you're upgrading into the larger tank. Drain all of the water into those buckets or Rubbermaid containers, whatever. Rubbermaid containers can be wishy-washy because they're not all food grade, and I usually like to stick to things that will be food grade. So, but anyways, fill all those buckets and or tubs. Move all of your fish and the things you're going to keep into those tubs, and then take that tank down, set the new tank up. You're going to have all of that water that those fish are in. And again, you have to do this as quickly as possible to try to prevent changes in temperature and stuff like that. Obviously, when you do this, temperature changes is going to be slowly over time. But get the new tank set up, get everything running on the new tank, and then you can essentially start putting all of that water that you've got in those buckets with your fish and stuff into that aquarium and moving things in slowly. Make sure your temperature with new water is as close as you can get it. Using a thermometer is even best to the water that the fish are in. Not when you took them out of the tank, but that they are currently in the bucket. So you test the bucket water that they're currently in and then you try to make the tank water that exact same temperature as you're filling things up and get everything plugged in, running slowly. Do not rinse your filter media in anything other than some water from the tank, just to dislodge anything that's in there. And don't clean the filter up at all. Just kind of let whatever's in there just do its thing, get the tank set up, running, and give the fish a day or so before you feed them, just so you're not adding any extra potential waste into the tank. That's basically what I do. It usually goes just fine, but keeping as much water as you can and not messing around with the filter is the best. If you're getting a new filter, hook up the old filter on that tank along with the new filter and let them run in tandem for 2 weeks. That'll give your old filter an opportunity to filter the water of the bioload of the fish you already have in there, which is going to be fine because they've been doing it already. And then the new filter will get a chance to colonize, and then you can start adding more fish.
Awesome. Can you guys talk about hang-on refugium on a reef tank?
Sure. What do you want to talk about?
Do you like it? Like, I don't know.
No, I'm kidding. Hang-on refugiums are great. They definitely have a place, especially with smaller aquariums. A lot of people would buy, back in the day, they were a lot more popular than they are now because so many all-in-one systems have enough space that you could kind of just put one in. But hang-on refugiums are awesome. They give you a place outside of the main tank to grow chaetomorpha. I will always say chaeto, so chaetomorpha algae, caulerpa if you really wanted to, although I usually am just a proponent of chaeto because it doesn't go sexual or go toxic. And, you know, a small pump runs the water through there, and you don't have to have a sump system, but it essentially gives you the same benefit of having a refugium that you would normally have to have under your aquarium in a sump. So I think they're great. There are some drawbacks. Many of them these days will have a black background on the actual tank itself, the hang-on refugium, so that there is no light bleed between that and your aquarium. But if the light you're putting on it is like an LED light that you've suspended, you could be getting some bleed off from that light into the tank as well, which will obviously change the distribution of light in your main system or provide a type of light in that system that you weren't intending to, especially if you're using a hydroponic style blue, red, blurple LED to grow your chaeto. So those are some things to be aware of, but they work well, and I have nothing against them. I have used them in the past.
A good freshwater sump for a 120 gallon.
So there isn't really a bad sump that you can use for freshwater, realistically. That said, I do actually really like the Pro Clears that I was using on the 265, the Pro Clear 4-in-1 reef sump, even though it's for reefs, because like I said, it's got that section where you can slow the flow down in it. And I put a bunch of denitrate media in there to help absorb nitrates, to keep my nitrates down. So that worked out really well. So I do really like that about that sump. But if you wanted to, you could use their more dulled down version, which I think is just called their reef sump. Because you can put whatever media you want in whatever order you want in a sump. It's not going to hurt anything. There's really no bad sump, but they're good. I've also used the trigger system sumps plenty of times, and you could easily use that on a freshwater tank. It would be just as useful as a saltwater tank. The only instance in which you may want something different is if you want to run bioballs. I don't know many people who do anymore, but you can run like a trickle filter in the Pro Clear 4-in-1. It's set up so you could do that as well if you wanted to. So more options that way. And I think they're actually less expensive than the same size trigger systems sump. So you're also saving a bit of money.
And that's always good.
Yeah. But I mean, you could go crazy and get a Bash C sump. If you haven't ever seen their sumps, they're ridiculous. They got a big price tag. They're ridiculous and expensive for a reason. They're amazing, but you got to have deep pockets for that kind of stuff. And considering it's a filter, I usually swing towards something more economical, unless you're going to have a glass stand and see everything under there.
Fair enough. What are some good bottom feeder tank mates for guppies? Thanks, love all the videos.
Bottom feeder tank mates for guppies. Lots of options. If you're just looking for some cleanup on the bottom, Cory catfish do a great job of excess food, but you have to keep in mind, and this is something I think a lot of people don't consider. Bottom feeders don't eat poop, number one. You're not going to find one that's going to eat poop. And number two, if you're using them to try to clean up extra food, if there isn't enough extra food, you actually have to feed them on top of that. So I think there's definitely a way in which they do help assist them out by making sure that there isn't too much food waste down there. So there's a utility. We also have to treat them like they are just another beautiful fish in our tank that we want to keep happy and healthy, and think of them that way primarily. But I think Corys do an awesome job at bottom feeding. There are all kinds of catfish that will stay on the bottom that come in various different sizes. I'm a massive fan of Raphael catfish. They're awesome. I would consider them a bottom feeder as well, although I've seen them come up and just go crazy when any food is in the tank and just start eating from everywhere. Pim cats can be pretty good for that, but they get big. But I think a great place to start is most types of Cory cats. Great place to start. Plecos, they do a pretty decent job with some algae. I love fancy plecos. Massive fan of fancy plecos. They're a lot of fun. I don't know if I'd really consider them a bottom feeder in the sense that they're going to help eat up extra food. I usually consider them just a separate tank mate that I'm going to have to, feed separately. So, but yeah, there's also shrimp for guppies. Shrimp would be fine.
Hey Thomas, I'm wondering how often you can add new fish to a 20-gallon fish tank. I love your vids, thanks.
How often you can add fish? My general rule of thumb as you're setting up a tank is 2 weeks. 2 weeks between fish should give your filter a pretty decent time to catch up. But that said, I also recommend every 2 weeks I usually recommend every week, but every 2 weeks, if you're going to add fish, test your water first, see where your parameters are actually at. Because you don't want to take fish from the store and drop them in your tank if you're like desperate for a water change and you have elevated nitrates. Or worse off, you're showing some ammonia and your nitrates are also very high. That would tell you you're either really pushing your bioload boundary or your tank's just not ready for more fish yet. So test, but every 2 weeks is my general rule of thumb when you're adding more fish to your tank.
Cool. Is it safe to keep corydoras in a gravel tank? I have slate pebbles over most of the gravel so they wouldn't be scraping themselves along a sharp surface, but I don't want to hurt them if I get any.
If your pea gravel is rounded, like if you're using aquarium gravel that does not have sharp sides at all, they'll generally do just fine. But the key thing is there are no sharp edges. You don't want them damaging their barbels. It's not great for them. It can cause failure to thrive in the long term because they use their barbels a lot to try to find food and to forage. So they're kind of an important appendage on their face. But yeah, if there's nothing sharp, they should be okay.
Cool. I just bought a Sonson HW 3000. Any opinions? I had to go cheap and wanted a UV to help with whatever is growing in my tank.
I have opinions. I've never used a Sonson. I know lots of people that have. That being said, I haven't really heard in particular, although I don't go looking for this kind of information. So I haven't heard anything in particular regarding them being poor filters. My opinion is strictly on any filter that has a proprietary UV built into it that can be difficult to get replacement parts for. Especially if the UV unit and the filter run off the same cork. If that UV ever fries or becomes inoperable, or if you accidentally damage the quart sleeve, that filter is instantly useless. Instantly useless. So the reason that happens or it becomes useless is because if you basically create a fire hazard, like you break that quart sleeve and now there's water running through the electrical component, you now have a canister filter you can't plug into the wall that's no longer circulating water to the aquarium, which means you don't have a filter anymore, right? And you could actually damage all that biomedia in a fairly short period of time if you start running current through the tank, not to mention what it's going to do to your fish. So long story short, I personally avoid completely filters that have UV built directly into them. I like to keep those components separate. The simpler things are, basically, the less, it's all, for me, it's all about redundancy. If they're separate things, one can fail and the other thing's still good. And if a UV unit fails, I can at least turn it off and remove it from the system, and I'm still filtering the tank, and my biological's still good, and my fish are still good. If they're attached to each other, I break two things at once if one of those two things fails. So, yeah, that's my opinion. I don't think Sonson's bad. don't like that design. It rubs me the wrong way. It just scares me. I hate the idea that I'm losing two things at once. And things will inevitably fail at some point. Always. It could be 30 years. I don't know. But nothing lasts forever. Yeah.
On that note,
look at the dinosaurs.
On that note, this answer, I think it's come to a close. A question about floating plants. Are any of them suitable for very low light tanks, or do they all require medium to high light?
Floating plants?
Yes.
Duckweed will survive anything. I'm pretty sure duckweed would survive.
That's what Josh has said too. Duckweed will grow under any light, but
Yeah.
remember it's invasive, and when you're trimming or removing some, do not flush it down the toilet.
Do not.
tip.
It is. It's honestly important. I think some people eat duckweed. Don't quote me on that, but look up. See if duckweed is a edible item. Duckweed's great. If you have low light, duckweed is better because it will grow slower, which is excellent because it grows way too fast as it is. Duckweed.
I've set up a 75-gallon tank and used a fluorite substrate, but
Nice.
Dumb mistake, I forgot to wash and rinse it, and now the water's cloudy. What's the best thing to do to make it clear, and how long will it take?
I know we have a video on like my combination for crystal clear tanks.
Three ways to get crystal clear water.
So what I would do, because a lot of that is super fine particulate matter, you need to use a flocculant in the water. Flocculant? Sure. So something like Chem Clarity, it's going to help take all that super fine material and kind of bond it together so that it will get stuck in your mechanical filtration and then you can pull it out. I'd highly recommend getting either a bunch of filter floss and using that, or you can actually, I think Coralife makes some, do we even have Coralife? I don't know. Anyways, there are various micron pads you can get that are super thin that have a micron rating of 100 or less. I think we had one at one point. Yeah, see if there's a micron pad. Type on micron after that. Booyah! So 100 micron and 50 micron. I would probably get the 50 micron pad. It comes in 30 by 36 or 18 by 30, and you can just cut it to fit your filter. And that is actually a super tight weave. It's going to plug up very fast. But the nice thing is it will pull that particulate matter that's making your tank cloudy out very easily. So the other nice thing is those you can actually rinse and reuse a few times before they stretch out past the point of no return. So that is definitely a quick way to get it out. We all make that mistake every now and again. Sometimes you're rinsing and you're rinsing and you're rinsing and you're rinsing and it just never gets fully clean. So you give up and put it in your tank and pour water on it slowly.
Fair enough. I've linked the video, the 3 simple ways for crystal clear water, and I linked the Coralife micron pads there. So check them both out and see what you think will work for you. Next up, the next question is, hey, someone said they're watching our React videos. They love it and thumbs up. That's nice. Freeze-dried food versus live food, which is better?
Okay. For safety's sake, I will say freeze-dried is probably better than live unless you're culturing yourself in a pristine environment so that you know for a fact that your live food is not bringing any other unwanted contaminants into your aquarium. I'm not saying that live food is bad. Live food is awesome for fish. It really stimulates fish that are predatorial, especially to have a hunger drive or basically want to eat. So if you have fish that are not eating and you need to entice them, it can work really, really well. If frozen food or freeze-dried food's not working, pre-soaked, freeze-dried. But like I said, there is some risk. So I've always preferred to have my own cultures of live food that I'm going to be feeding. Feeding live feeder fish, it can be tough, and I would highly recommend anybody who does it quarantine their feeders and treat them prior to feeding their fish, because that is a really easy way. If you consider that feeder fish are basically produced en masse specifically to be fed to other fish, I think just the nature of that makes them, a little bit more fragile or a little bit more likely to fall victim to carrying some kind of bacteria or ailment that they could pass on to your fish, because they're not pet fish, they are food fish. Worse off, food fish for other fish. So you got to be careful. So in that regard, I do prefer freeze-dried or frozen. But I think live food definitely has its place, especially with breeding sensitive species that will only take live food or have only ever been known to take live food. And in that way, it can be very important.
How do you safely raise the pH and hardness levels if you're raising African cichlids? My water is on the softer side and my pH levels are typically stable at 7.4.
So that's a little low for Africans. Luckily, Africans for the most part are pretty forgiving, although I do find if you give them exactly what they want in terms of a habitat, they do color up better. They definitely breed better, and overall, you'll get more natural behaviors out of them. So there are tons of products that are designed to help raise your carbonate hardness or raise the pH naturally with minerals that cichlids are used to or can benefit from because they're in the water column. So Seachem has a whole slew of cichlid-based products that you could use that are going to be great for raising your pH. I think Kent would also have the same or similar additives. There's all kinds of stuff. They're usually referred to as buffers, although there are mineral additives. Josh, what's your favorite? Drop that in the section there. What's your favorite? I know Josh has got a lot of phenomenal cichlid background. Before I got him hooked on reefing, Josh was a cichlid nut. And now I think he's just both a cichlid nut and a reef addict, because I think that's the best way to describe that. But Josh will give you his favorite one. I've used quite a few and I've found that they're all pretty decent. But yeah, you just want to buffer the water up to where they want. Another thing you can do if you don't already have substrate in the tank that's calcium based, there are lots of substrates made by Carib Sea, is actually a fantastic company for these kinds of substrates. I love them. That will buffer the water for you to help naturally raise things up if you don't want to put powders in the water or liquids in the water to raise it up. And that's another way to do it.
Cool. Next up, what is a good nano fish for a reef 20 and 5 gallon tank? I know there's a lot of videos, but what's your experience?
Nano fish. I love micro gobies. Pick a micro goby. They're awesome. Cleaner gobies, which don't actually only clean, you can actually feed them all kinds of small foods and they do quite well. Shrimp gobies like Yashahashi gobies. I think that's it. They're ridiculous. They look like candy canes with smiles. Other nano fish, there are some species of damsel that stay very small, although I will warn you that damsels can be pretty cranky towards anything else in the tank. I also really love inverts for nano tanks. Depending on how nano you go, you could also do things like 6-line wrasses or 4-line wrasses. But yeah, there's tons of stuff.
Right?
I find mostly gobies. Anyways.
Cool. What is a good oh no, I read that one already. I'm silly. I have a filter, a heater. I keep it at 80. It's a 5.5 and 2. That's not a question. Oh, maybe you were answering Josh. Okay. Hi, my flower horn has these white marks on its cock. What could it be?
Okay, so it could be a couple things. If it looks like they're missing scales, it's possible that he rubbed his cock against something hard in the aquarium and just injured it and removed some scales, and now there's an abrasion mark there. If it's just some white striation, it's possible it's a part of his pattern, especially if he has any of that color anywhere else in his body. But I think the key things are that it doesn't have a texture, that it is just coloration on the scales. There's nothing raised, there's nothing lowered. Then I would say it's probably something closer to just being pigment or lack thereof pigment based on his pattern. But if there's any kind of a texture to it or that looks like there's scales missing, it's probably an injury of some kind. Without a picture of his cock, it would be hard for us to really determine exactly what it is. So if you want to send a picture of your flower horn's massive head bubble to our support team, they can definitely try to help you diagnose what's wrong or potentially what's not wrong with his perma hat.
Well said, sir.
I got tired of saying cock.
Yeah, I don't blame you. No jokes. Thomas, I have an RO system. Can I run the produced water through a calcite canister to raise pH of the water? Will it be safe for fish?
I've never tried it. As long as it is a food grade product or a calcium, I wonder if calcium reactor media would do that. As long as it's a fish safe product that you're running the water through afterwards to raise the pH, it's possible that it'll work. But I'd be willing to bet you would get a much more reliable result from just adding RO, right, or a similar product to raise the calcium in a very precise amount every time. Because when you run water through, let's say, another thing to try to raise pH, you may not, depending on how fast the water's going through it, depending on the temperature of the water as it goes through it, that, like, there's a lot of factors that could determine whether or not you're getting a consistent result at the end of the line or at your bucket before the water goes in. Whereas if you're just using straight RO, you know it's RO, there's nothing else going on in it, and you want to raise the pH, you have a product that you can very precisely be like, this exact amount, whether it's, let's say, a teaspoon is going to raise it to this exact pH, you know 1 teaspoon every time, or 1.5 teaspoons, or whatever it is. You just flick it into the bucket, there's no questions, and you're going to have the same result every time. You may not have that, and probably won't have that, benefit if you're running it through a separate reactor to try to raise it X amount by the time it gets to the end. The flow, like, too many factors come into play to whether or not that's going to work in the way you want it to. You could just luck out and it be bang on where you want it, but that's a lot less likely.
All right. So we've got a couple minutes left here.
Whoa.
I think we've got 5 or 10 minutes left to go. So we're going to move into our lightning round.
I've been windy today.
Yeah. No, that's all right. We've gotten through a
Long-winded, not farty.
Well, both. We've gone through a lot, and before we move on to the lightning round, I just want to once again thank everybody for joining us for these Q&As and
They were a lot of fun.
For watching our vids in general. We really, really appreciate it. We want to keep growing. We have specific goals for where we want this channel to go, and your support means
the
everything
world.
to us. Yeah.
We can't do this without you guys. We just can't.
No. And so it's super helpful. And if you ever get the opportunity, share this channel with your friends, with your family, your dentist, your grandma, your pet dog, anyone. It'll just help us achieving those goals and bringing you more and more what we hope is helpful and entertaining content. So thanks again. Be sure to do that whenever you get the chance. Facebook, Reddit, Twitter, the Instagrams, wherever you want to spread the word. We'd appreciate it. And again, the best way to support us, as always, is to, whether you're joining us in store, online, check out biglspets.com.ca or Big L Supercenters. Best way to support us. But again, as always, thank you for everything.
Yeah.
So with all that said, lightning round?
Let's do it.
Lightning round. How high must the temperature for tropical fish be?
A good temperature is between 76 and 78 degrees.
Wondering if I can buy distilled water from Walmart instead of an RO system, as it's just going to be a micro reef.
Yeah, you can. If you can even get RO water, I would just use RO water.
I put some driftwood in my tank that used to be outside. I'm now finding out I should boil these. How long is that usually done for? 22 minutes, 20 minutes? It's fragile, so I fear it'll break down. Any tips?
I would say 10 minutes is probably a good amount of time. If you're worried about it not doing well, you could also bake it. You don't have to boil it. It doesn't have to be water. If you bake it, same idea.
Cool. How do you sex electric blue rams? Love your vids, guys.
I think they're mildly sexually dimorphic, although I can't rightly say because it's been a while. But I'm pretty sure I had a pair once and they looked almost the same. Crebensis cichlids are a little bit tough on that too. Males are usually more colorful in general.
Great. Okay, I planted 10 pots of Cuba with decent light and CO2. After a couple weeks, 70% of them started to grow really fast, but the rest of them completely vanished. Any reason, you think?
Failure to thrive just happens when you separate plants sometimes. For whatever reason, if it didn't take, don't worry too much about it. It happens pretty commonly. The rest of it will spread out after the fact. It happens all the time.
Please suggest food for gourami fish since my gourami is not eating tetrabits.
Ooh. Try a flake food, and if that's not working, try some frozen bloodworms or frozen brine shrimp and see if that goes over any better. Sometimes it's just a matter of getting them eating, and then you can slowly switch them over to something that is going to be more beneficial to them than a frozen food that has a lot of water content.
Nature's Ocean versus Carib Sea live sand, and is half life rock, half dry rock fine?
I'm a Carib Sea fan. However, I haven't used Nature's Ocean, so I couldn't rightly say. But I do really like Carib Sea. I think they have amazing products. They do a really good job, and they seem to really care about their products, which is important to me. And what was the second part? Live rock and dry rock.
Right.
I would say if it's a money thing, I would say it's fine. But consider that if you're doing live rock and dry rock, you have neither the benefit of either. you kind of only get the benefit of the live rock having some live component to it. But the whole point of using dry rock, for the most part, is to try to prevent having parasites or algae you don't want or anything transferring over to your tank that you're starting from having this live rock. So personally, I like dry rock to start instead of live. However, I know there are people on both sides of that. I just would rather not deal with any of the potential hitchhikers, whether they're positive or negative.
Fair enough.
Forget it of that. Just don't want it.
All right. What is the recommended hardness in the water for a shrimp, little lobster tank?
Freshwater? Does it say?
It does not say.
Because we use the word lobster, I'm going to pretend it's saltwater. And did they ask about pH?
They just asked the hardness of the water. What
Hardness.
is the recommended hardness in the water?
Hard. Saltwater tanks are super hard. It's always incredibly hard. But hardness is always good for most crustaceans. There are some that don't like hard water because you want some carbonate hardness because of their shell. So if you have a low pH and soft water, sometimes what that can do is cause pitting in their carapace or in snails in the actual shell, and it looks like etching because it's actually dissolving, or they're unable to properly build the calcium carbonate shell or chitin that they have. Next.
Okay, we'll do 3 more. So I have 3 gouramis in my tank. I started off with 6 and I'm down to 3.
Yikes.
I had 2 flames, 2 powders, and 2 blue spotted, down to 1 of each. They keep picking at each other. Should I get more, or what would be a better solution?
Man, how big's the tank?
Doesn't say.
You may just have not enough space that could be causing them to constantly fight with each other. The other issue you may have is not enough barriers, visual barriers for them. So I find that they do really well in either heavily planted tanks or tanks that have a lot of driftwood or rocks, something to help keep them from constantly being in each other's faces. So that could even help. Send a picture of your tank to our support team. They may be able to tell you whether or not you have enough space, or whether or not they will tell you whether or not you have enough space, or whether or not you have enough actual stuff in the tank to help mitigate some of the aggression that your gouramis may be showing towards each other.
Speaking of duckweed, like we did, what's the best, most responsible, safest way to dispose of it?
Burn it with fire! No, I'm just kidding. I would wager that you could probably... Man, I don't know, because it depends on where you are and how the municipality handles waste. I would say either the garbage or your green bin. The key thing with the green bin is it has to go to a recycling facility where they make things like fertilizer and stuff out of it. I don't really know how every municipality handles that sort of thing. The last thing you want is them throwing it into like a field or some sort of waste management area where it could easily get back into the local water system. So I would say probably the trash is best in a green garbage bag, and then sending it away to be put in a landfill, sadly.
All right. Last question, and he says, let me know if this is a dumb question or not. We appreciate any question. And
dumb or otherwise.
Yeah, we're happy to answer it. Love your guys' videos. They're very informative. Thank you. I know this is a dumb question, but my reef tanks, no water changes, and my corals are growing. Should I mess with it and do water changes?
I would say this. Test your water. See if you need to do a water change based on what your tests are showing. If what you're doing is working, and it has been working for a long time, I say long time because it can take a while for something like calcium or alkalinity to drop in your aquarium. So if it's only been a month, we don't know whether or not it's actually working. It could just be working right now. Your corals could hit a point of stress because calcium levels are super low or alkalinity levels are super low. But if it's been working for a really long time, whatever you're doing, just coast. Just do what you're doing. If it has been working for you, don't mess with it. There are so many different ways to do things in this wonderful hobby. And the last thing you want to do is try to hit somebody else's idea or recommendation of correct and have it actually work against you. And it happens all the time. There's something that gets talked about on forums quite often, reef forums, and that's chasing numbers. Chasing numbers ain't great. You want to try to keep things within an acceptable range, but if you're chasing a number just because somebody said this is what I think is best, it may not actually work. So a really good example of that is there are ratios in which calcium and alkalinity are in perfect balance, and if you try to change one, it will actually negatively affect the other, or you just simply won't be able to hit the level you're trying to hit with it, and you're going to be chasing it forever. So the best thing to do is test your water, see where you're at. If you stay within those parameters that are acceptable for coral growth, doing whatever maintenance you currently do, just keep doing that. And if you find you start to dip, find a method that's going to work for you to help bring it back up, whether it's something as simple as adding some 2-part or doing water changes. Some people do 5-gallon water changes on 20-gallon tanks once a week, and that's all they do, and it works for them. I've done that. It's wonderful. But you got to do what you're doing. That's working for you. And the only way to know if it's going to continuously work is to test. And just watch your animals. Yeah.
Very good. I think we're going to wrap it up there.
Yay!
So thank you again, everyone, for joining us for another live Q&A. As always, we do these every single week, and we've said it the last few times. We're working on getting a date nailed down where we will consistently and reliably have it on X date at Y time, and we will keep you guys posted. But until then, keep an eye on our community tab, because we'll post there as soon as we know what date and time we're going to be streaming. We'll post it there, and you guys can check it out and try and join us. Anything else you wanna say to our lovely viewers?
I love you guys. It's awesome. I have a lot of fun doing this. I hope that the information I give you is useful for you. And I hope to see you back, and I hope to keep doing the Thomas Reacts videos because I love seeing your tanks.
We have no choice. We have like 150 pictures and videos, so we're gonna have to do more.
Yay.
Yeah, there's no choice.
I'm really excited.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks again, everyone, and I guess as always,
keep on tanking.
Yeah.